Hey everyone, this is Serious Coin Podcast, and I'm your host, Kelly Willis Green. If you've listened before, you know this is the podcast where we have rich conversations about wealth. So, what happens when power, money, and emotions collide in a romantic relationship? We often describe love in grand, universal terms. They were over the moon in love, or a relationship that's written in the stars. Well, my guest compares the special combination of wealth and love to something much more rare, a meteor going by Earth. Because love is different when wealth is in the mix. So says Don Opatrny, a licensed marriage and family therapist to some of the wealthiest couples in the world. Don's co-founder and president of the Lovins Group. It's a firm of professionals whose work is helping families of generational wealth to flourish. Don has served on the Leaders Council of the Ultra High Net Worth Institute. He's been a board member of multiple family businesses and nonprofits. He's also a husband, a father, and a veteran of his own multi-generational family business. In this episode, Don and I discuss everything from what couples need to learn about the power of giving and receiving, to the impact of sudden wealth on our sense of belonging, and unique relationship challenges for people who've created massive wealth in one generation. Don tells me his work sits at the intersection of love, money, and power. Have a listen.
I think that each of these is an extremely powerful energy, and they exist for every couple. But I happen to work with extremely wealthy couples, and there is something about the gravitational pull of money, lots of it, that tends to have an effect on how we love one another and how we exercise power or how we feel in the process of power being used. And so it's a very complicated equation. And there's something about the gravitational pull of the money that seems related to its volume. If you think of a meteor that's going by Earth, a little tiny one has a gravitational energy, but a really massive one has an extraordinary force. Each of them, in and of themselves, are very difficult things to understand and to manage and to navigate. And when you put them all together in the same equation, they can at times be overwhelming.
So that's what we're going to focus on today and look at that from many different angles. But as you were talking, I was thinking, is it true that old adage of like more money, more problems? Does the amount of money, using your meteorite example, does the amount of money impact the types of conflicts that your clients experience? Like some people would say, what do you have to argue over when money is no object?
Yes. So I think that's one of the contributing factors to the challenges that we're going to talk about. Is there is something about the cultural zeitgeist that kind of believes that if you just had more resources, that a lot of the challenges that couples face would decrease. It's like it's often said as one of the five things that couples always fight about is money. And so there is this belief in a way that if you had enough, then that wouldn't be a fight. What we find is that there is something about dealing with extreme amounts of financial resources that seem to heat up all of the other kinds of challenges that couples deal with. And I think that there is something about its volume. It's almost like as the volume grows, there are certain kinds of relational pressures that are both internal and external. So, like the external being, what do other people think of us, which
Mhm.
is something that every couple kind of has to manage. And the volume has impacts on the individuals in the couple and the couple's space itself in a whole host of ways. We've identified 8 specific challenges that we think at the Lovins Group that we think are really central. They're things that if couples kind of had a sense of what these 8 challenges are and how to navigate them, they might have a chance.
Okay, well, that's helpful then. So maybe give us two or three of the most impactful?
Yeah, we could spend the whole time on just what these 8 challenges are, so I'll need to be careful. Okay, I think I would start with one of the things that is central to bonding in intimate relationships is a sense that there is a dynamic balancing of giving and receiving. In situations where there is extraordinary wealth, financial resources, the skewing of what can be given and what can be received can change the dynamic quite significantly. And we're all hardwired to feel into these imbalances. There's something in us that has a sense that relationships are built on this process of giving and receiving.
Reciprocity.
Reciprocity is key. And so, in this context, you can begin to imagine all of the complications where the ideas about who made the money and who gets to benefit from the money can kind of change a lot of the dynamics in a relationship, which is very, very different than a couple, they could call it the dinks, right? Double income, no kids couple. And how they're trying to manage the balance of giving and receiving is very different than in some of these situations.
That one, as you describe it, really hits home for me. And we'll get into this as we talk about the different scenarios. But I think I've shared with you and with listeners that there's a wealth disparity between myself and my husband.
Mm.
When we came into the relationship, he had more, and I had a lot of difficulty receiving because I guess on an instinctive level was aware that it could impact the balance of power in our relationship. And so I was trying to match him stride for stride, splitting everything down the middle. And you can imagine the strain that would place on me. And at the same time, limitations on him because he knew the impact it would have on me. And so he maybe didn't necessarily live or travel the way he might have otherwise, knowing it was split 50-50. So all to say, I really relate to that one. And that's been my lived experience.
So I just wanted to pick up on something there. The difficulty in receiving is very understandable once you dig into what is this balance of giving and receiving all about. And the fact that once we receive something of significant value, we do feel one down.
Mm.
Like we do feel some form of obligation to give back. And so learning a bit more about the power of receiving in relationship is something that a lot of these couples need to learn. The giving is easier. The giving actually makes you feel a little bit superior, a little bit one up. And so developing our ability to receive, to do that with love, to practice gratitude is something that a lot of the couples we work with need to learn. So we have a whole gratefulness practice. There's something about intimacy where we have to acknowledge our need for one another. It's like our bonds are made by needing one another, and we live in a culture where we're not supposed to need anybody. It's rampant individualism. We're going to do our whole journey of self-actualization. And what does it mean to actually humble ourselves to need another?
Particularly, I would think if you've been a wealth creator, self-made wealth creator.
There is something about what it takes to create a fortune in this culture that in some ways seems a bit antithetical to what it takes to grow an intimate partnership, a connection with another human on a very deep level. And so that is part of the challenge. What are the personality traits? What are the qualities? What are the demands in order to do that in one generation? I work with a family that has double digit billions that were created in one generation from nothing. The qualities that it took, and that couple did it together. Like they were very much seen as co creating this incredible enterprise. But what it took for them to do that did not make them great parents. There was something about what it takes to raise a family that is a bit different than what it takes to raise an enterprise. Now, and that's actually quite rare to do it together. And so, very often, a fortune is created by one of the members of the couple. And there is something about that happening that pulls on this issue about inequalities, that it often makes one feel quite superior. There is something about a grandiose personality trait, like I can do this, that allows for a big fortune to be made, that isn't always good for intimacy, because there is something about being a bit superior in your mind with great capabilities that can sometimes make your partner feel small. It's sometimes like a feeling of being on a seesaw, right? It's like when one goes up, the other kind of feels down. And then what do you do when you're down on a seesaw? You fire your legs and you come up and you try to put down the person that just made you feel small. And so those kinds of power struggle dynamics are happening quite consistently, I think, throughout the creation of a fortune. And so, in a way, like, what's the chicken and the egg? The fissure, like, is it related to the meteor hitting the system, or was it something that the couple didn't find a way to manage all the way along the line?
And now that I've got untold sums, everything's possible for me. The supermodel girlfriend, the complete remake of my own physical embodiment.
All of my identity, like, the quality of toys that I can buy that
Mhm.
might make me feel superior to others, it's remarkable. And it's funny too, like, there's, because this idea of competitiveness in the marketplace that helps us succeed, there's that energy of who's on top, like, how
Mhm.
am I going to win now that I have all of this, that continues. And there is something about that kind of focus that, again, feeds the ego. It doesn't really feed the heart. It doesn't really feed communion and connection. And there's a hidden trap in all of this too, that even the wealthiest people on the planet are experiencing, which, although they can do almost anything, they have this constant companion of FOMO that's there. What am I missing
Yes.
out of? Maybe there is some greater experience because I can do anything. What do I actually choose to pay attention to? And that kind of pull outside of themselves and who they really are and what their heart really wants in terms of closeness and connection with their partner can be a whole other strain.
I would like to explore two different scenarios specifically, and one is the couple who's been together a long time, and then there's a massive life-changing liquidity event
Mhm.
versus the couple, as I referenced, where they each come into the relationship with unequal balance sheets. And my sense is, when you come into money, I always say it's a little bit like Alice going down the rabbit hole into Wonderland. It is surreal, right? It's disorienting. And there's this process of rediscovering or redefining your identity. It's classic hero's journey. And in both scenarios, that's a necessary part of the process. And if we start with the first one, the couple's been together a long time, I would think that on one hand, there'd be a bit of an asset in having this wealth experience with this person that you love and trust and can confide in, and you're going through this experience together. On the other hand, at the end of the day, it's still a highly individual experience of coming to terms with on finding your footing in this foreign land. So that could be isolating if you're not experiencing it in the same way or not communicating about it in the same way. Long-winded question to say, what have your clients told you, or what have you observed that it is like for couples who are having this experience?
So, like everything I think I'm going to say today, we have to put a it depends on it, right? Because there are
Sure.
so many factors. It's almost like we're looking at a multifaceted diamond, and how the light comes through one part of it depends on many factors. You said something interesting, that a couple comes into this wealth when they love each other, trust each other, have gone through thick and thin with each other. That is a unique scenario.
Hmm.
I would say it is one of the, yes, it would be an extraordinary resource to be able to handle the meteor of this, significant sudden wealth coming into their life. If they had a sense that they were building it together, that they did this as a shared purpose, that in some ways they both contributed to its creation, whether through actually being partners in its creation or being partners through a division of labor and taking care of different things. And there's a high level of respect for what each partner contributed to us making it. That's a remarkable foundation to be able to integrate all of the challenges that come as a result of this newness, the Alice in Wonderland experience. There are still going to be major challenges to be faced, even if you have this sense
Right.
of togetherness in it. One of the fundamental things is that I think often kind of shocks couples is its impact on all of their relationships outside of the couple. As human beings, we have this fundamental need to belong. Like it's what ensured our survival when we were little, right? We had to belong to our families, or else we felt like we weren't going to make it. This is eons in the making, where you had to belong to a tribe to survive. And there is something about sudden increase in status and capabilities to do things in the world that fundamentally changes your relationship with everyone you know. So, how did it change your relationship with your siblings, with your own parents, with your close friends? There's something about status that makes people anxious on both sides of the line. And so, having financial resources and suddenly changing your relationship with your friends because you don't know how to deal with that, or your siblings, it's a very big stress for couples. And sometimes they take it out on each other rather than finding the ways to manage this new reality in their lives.
Can you give me an example from your practice?
Oh, sure. I worked with a couple where the wife grew up very working class family, lots of siblings. And she married someone who made a gargantuan fortune in his professional life. They were in it together. The steps in the creation of the wealth happened together. She then invite her siblings to come with them on vacation. She very generously created trust funds for her nieces and nephews for college education, etc. And the amount of giving she was able to do put enormous pressure on her relationships with her siblings because they didn't know how to give back. They got
Mm.
anxious about all that she now could do in the world and what she had access to that they didn't. And it put enormous pressure on their relationship. And I think her husband didn't have a real sense of empathy and compassion for what was going on because his attention was on what do I do now that it's like that idea of the dog chasing the fire truck. If once the dog catches the fire truck, what the heck do I do now? It's like, oh, I've got this. I've got this enormous new excitement and challenge to handle, and so it really wasn't something that brought them together. Another an interesting example of a couple that I work with who didn't make the money together. They actually were making a living as middle class, hardworking, sharing responsibilities, raising two children, family. And her brother sold a second generation family business, which she had a bunch of stock in, but it never meant anything because there was really never any distributions. And he sold it for billions of dollars.
Mm.
And all of a sudden, the meteor came into her life and her husband's life and her children's life without any preparation. And the two of them together have really taken on the challenge of what does this mean? How are we going to integrate it? How are we going to raise our children in this context? How are we going to protect this? How are we going to make it last for generations? Like it was a remarkable experience for the two of them to team up about it. And she did a very interesting thing when it first came. She immediately gave her husband a large gift to say, let's take the money problem off of the table, right? It's like, so here's yours. Might be exaggerating how that went a bit, but she did it with great love, because realizing that there was going to be some challenges about him coming to ask for money, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And then he took the leadership to begin to structure all of this in some meaningful way. He's incredibly grateful that he was able to do that and that they were a team about this. And yet there's times when she kind of says, well, you know, I missed out on the experience of being the queen, right? Like of it being mine and
Right.
kind of having the power to do things in a way. And so it's something they're able to joke about.
Don and I have been talking about the challenges of wealth on a relationship, but let's not forget there are tremendous blessings, right, that accrue to couples when they come into money. You can dream bigger and plan for the future. You can bond with one another over new experiences, whether it's travel or building your dream home, philanthropy, or whatever bucket list joint project you may have. But still, I had this nagging feeling, given all the pressures of love, money, and power. I had to ask Don, is there any hope for relationships?
Yeah. I wouldn't be in this work if I didn't feel that there was hope. And in a way, I think it is the one arena that offers hope. Because if a captain of industry cares deeply about his family, and sometimes it's actually the love for his children or grandchildren that ignite this interest in what am I doing in my intimate relationship. It, so there's something about love. When I said love, power, and money, like the power and money pull to that part of the triangle is so strong that often we have to help to reorient, like, where is love in this equation? Once they tap into their deepest longings, they realize that's really what's at the heart of it. There is something about finding their heart. There's something about the noun form of love, which is the desire to feel this heartful experience where compassion is there and generosity is there and caring and communion is there. It's a funny thing, that we fall into this thing we call love. Well, we know that love has a noun component to it. We sometimes believe that that component is just going to carry us through,
Mm.
until death do us part. And we forget a little bit that love also has a verb form, which in a way, when we're not feeling the noun form in our relationship, we need to find the verb form. And there is something about the constant doing in the verb form that can sometimes open the door to, oh, there's a different way of being that is necessary in this relationship that I can get to through some new kinds of doing. We give them lots of exercises that are there to open the heart. And sometimes the miracle happens and they begin to see that it's not just a noun and it's not just a verb, but there's something about, like, what is this thing called love that in some ways I'm living and moving and having my being in it? That there is a greater source. There is something there that I can be attuned with and live more consistently in my life. I personally think that the captains of industry today really need to find that, because the runaway train of power and money is having very significant effects on our entire civilization. And you're kind of seeing, in a way, how the billionaire class is having massive influence on the power structures all around the planet. And so I think it is the greatest hope, in a way, that couples relating is the hope that can bring the heart back online for some of these people who have enormous influence in the world. So
Mm.
that's what I've dedicated my life to trying to work through.
Beautifully said. I can see there's no end of material for your practice in so many different directions. It's funny you talk about decision making and those roles of authority. My husband's very balanced, and I do think we have a good partnership, but sometimes on rare occasions I would remind him, No, no, honey, CEO is on your business card. It's not on our marriage certificate. It comes with the territory, right? It's just so easy for that posture to follow them home at the end of the day.
What a skillful way of dealing with that. Like what you've just demonstrated is there is something about opening his awareness that you've done with connection and humor and recognizing that you have something to bring him into a different way of being. What often happens is when that role comes in the door, the spouse begins to feel small, begins to feel less than, begins to feel resentful that this move of directing, or every couple has power and control issues. And so learning a bit about how to manage the movements toward something and doing it as a partnership, it almost can never happen in a one up, one down movement. So if one partner takes the one up position, if you fall down to kind of a dependent place or a child place, you're going to exacerbate the problem because then you'll try to come up and square the equation. But what you did is he might have made a move, a little bit of kind of directing, and I'm the
Right.
in charge guy here,
Yeah.
and you stayed there. You stayed as his partner and saying, "Hey, wake up to something else. Come here with me." You didn't fall down. I think that's one of the skills that a lot of couples need to learn, that this isn't a parent and child relationship. It's adult to adult relating. When you expand your view of the kinds of capital that there are, the kinds of contributions that are needed to live a good life and to have a good family life, it expands this balance of giving and receiving. I work with a incredibly wealthy couple, double digit billions, and they struggled with some of this idea of the balance of giving and receiving. And he actually inherited significantly. And he was able to say to his life, like, you are essential to me. What
Mm.
you bring into my life is so valuable. And then he was able to be quite clear about what it was that she was bringing that he found incredibly valuable.
And to name it
And
specifically.
to name it specifically, like there are different currencies that flow in a
Mm.
relationship, and if we can pay attention to the various kinds of currencies, that's one of the things that mitigates the challenge of the balance of giving and receiving. He was one who really had to grow his sense of gratefulness because he had received so much in his life. There is something about receiving more that was a bit of a challenge. And so it was his desire to be a giver. Like when you've received so much, you just have this desire to give and to improve the world around him, was one that he was very engaged with. So growing the capacity to say, thank you. Here's what you've given me. Here's how I feel the value of you in my life is something to practice. Like he's got to learn how to practice that. And I would say that's one thing that we could all, everybody listening to this could grow in our ability to say thank you to our partners. Like it's such a gift in a way to be able to be a receiver. Like the old adage is better to give than receive. It breaks down in couples relating. In a way, what do we want most? We want to make an influence and an impact. We want to be seen as, we want to receive this kind of thank you, of course. But in order for that to work in couples relationship, we have to be willing to give it ourselves. We have to find those things that, because of you, my life is better. And I can say these things to you in a way that really touch, different love languages, like is part of that.
Well, that's a perfect segue for me to say thank you, Don. This has been
Um,
so lovely. It's really, really special work that you do. And I know that our listeners would get a lot out of this as well. But before I let you go, I'd like to
mhm.
turn the tables a bit. And we've been talking about other people's money. Now, I'd like to ask you a few questions that just show a little bit about how you think, feel, and behave with money. So this is our lightning round at the end. Are you game to play?
I'm game to play. Yeah. And it's kind of fascinating to me that we're at the end of this time already. I just kind of felt like we just got going. So it was lovely chatting with you. So let's see what happens in the lightning round.
All right. If you could get better at just one of the three following activities, which one would it
Mm,
be and why?
okay.
Investing, giving money away, or spending money?
Wow. Excellent question. Well, I think there is something about spending money and giving it away that I do have a lot of attention on, and my wife and I have attention on those things. But the investing thing is something we are quite passive about. It's one of those things that's kind of been on my radar. Like I've entrusted people to do it, and I kind of put it over there as if it doesn't really matter. But like in order for the other two things to be more lit up in our life, people can tolerate just a little trickle coming through their life, and other people can tolerate a big river running through their life. I think there's something about the magic of money and what it can do in the world, and I do want to want to consider myself a bit more of a magician, directing these resources to make an impact in the world and getting a bit smarter about how we invest and the people that we work with to direct that, I think would be a growth experience for us.
Amazing. How do you personally define luxury?
Mm. what a, you ask really lovely questions. The first one that comes to my mind is something about freedom with my time. It's because it's a bit scarce in my life. So there's something about, like, I often think about, like, the luxury items. Like, there's something about them being rare. Like, why is it that people care about this bag or this stone? Like, it's just a stone. So I think that there is something about things that have a bit of scarcity that we do consider luxury. And for me, um, I just took a 2 week trip to Japan with my wife and my son, and having that space of the three of us together, learning new things and experiencing new things, felt like an incredible luxury to me because of the freedom and because we had financial resources to create a bit of a magical experience. But it was more in the experience of it with this kind of relaxed uh, experience inside that felt like luxury to me.
Lovely. Um, who is someone you admire in terms of how they handle wealth?
My answer is going to have a little curve to it. One of the things that has been really important in my development in terms of working with wealthy people is the definition of wealth. And Jay Hughes has this wonderful way of working with words and where they come from. And the root of the word wealth is actually well being. And so when I think about people that I admire, it's almost always people who live with a kind of well being that makes me lean forward and kind of say, like, how are you like this? And because we've been talking about couples relating, somebody that comes to mind is really a genius at working with couples and has lived her life learning about couples relating and sharing with others and living it herself. And so I want to say Judith Hemming is one of my dear, dear teachers and somebody that I admire greatly. And if I, kind of say, like, who would I want to be like, in the world, like, she's one that comes immediately to mind. And she's made a substantial amount of money and came from money and all of that. But that's not really what I'm referring to in terms of wealth as well being.
Last question. If you just finish the sentence, to me, money is.
To me, money is a magic wand waiting for me to direct it as a magician. Money has the ability to become things. Money can become a college education, and money can become a drug addiction. Money can become a school for spiritual enlightenment, and it can become a nuclear bomb. Money doesn't really care what it turns into. It's waiting for those who have it in their care to direct it to have it be used for something, to transform into something. And so my image of money is as a magic wand. I think so many people spend their life trying to charge up that magic wand, gather enough money so that they have some power, gather, and then they try to protect the wand. Like they don't want to lose its power. And so there is something about developing as a magician. What am I going to do with these resources in my care that really, I think, lights me up about the experience of having money, using money, seeing the magic that it can do in the world. And I think the more that we can see our connection with all beings on the planet and that our use of money matters, it matters a lot to our own well-being and the well-being of others. I continue to think about it as magic.
Well, I think that's the best answer I have ever been given on the question of what money is. That's a wrap on today's conversation with Don Opatrny of the Lovins Group. Wealth, love, and power form a delicate triangle. And as we've heard, navigating that dynamic takes intention, communication, and sometimes expert guidance. If you'd like to learn more about the 8 major challenges of wealth in couples, or if you'd like to receive the gratitude practice that Don mentioned, you can email info@lovinsgroup.com, and I've put a link in the show notes. So thanks for tuning in. If you found this insightful, please share it with someone who might also benefit. Thanks for listening. This is Serious Coin, and I'm Kelly Willis Green. Serious Coin is provided for your general interest only, and nothing we discuss should be taken as investment, tax, legal, or other professional advice. Always talk to a licensed professional before you make any financial, legal, or investment decisions.